800 years ago, an 80-year-old monk sat in a quiet room, attempting something no army could accomplish. Outside his walls, the 13th century was tearing Korea apart. The Mongol Empire was systematically moving south, reducing cities to ash, looting ancient temples, and slaughtering the population. The state had already written its official history. It was a formal, sterile ledger of royal lineages, border wars, and political successions. But that ledger deliberately excluded the rest of life. It left out the foundation myths passed from grandmother to child. It ignored the folklore and the quiet, everyday miracles claimed by ordinary villagers. The educated historians in the capital had made a choice. They decided these cultural stories were not serious enough to warrant preservation. The monk looked past the burning cities and saw a different kind of ruin. If these unwritten stories vanished, the survivors would eventually wake up in a country they no longer recognized. When a nation keeps its facts but allows its myths to burn, it loses the ability to understand its own identity. So, well into his 70s, he began to travel. He walked to remote mountain temples and sat with the elderly in isolated rural villages, listening. He copied down the legends and foundational stories that had never appeared in any state document, deliberately capturing the voices the state ignored. He took what the educated elite dismissed as superstition and treated it as vital historical data. He bypassed that rigid archival filter entirely, determined to catch the cultural soul of his people before it evaporated under the weight of an invading army. The sheer endurance this required was immense. He worked straight through into his 80s, finishing the manuscript just days before his death. His work illustrates how cultural memory relies on the individuals who choose to document what the formal record refuses to take seriously. Following his death, his book was treated exactly as you might expect. Serious scholars dismissed it as a strange curiosity, a mere supplement to the real history of the state. It took centuries for academics to realize that the official histories were a dead end, endlessly repeating the same sterile successions and border skirmishes. The monk's text became the sole surviving record of the oldest poems and foundational stories that make East Asian culture recognizable to itself. While the royal chronicles tracked the movement of power, the monk tracked the movement of the people's imagination, preserving the myths that allowed them to recognize themselves. The most essential record of any civilization is the one written by the person who simply refuses to let the small voices disappear. Most of us will never need to preserve the memory of an entire nation, but almost all of us are currently presiding over the quiet disappearance of something irreplaceable. We produce the largest volume of official records in human history. Every calendar invite, email, and meeting is perfectly archived. Yet beneath this data, our unofficial memories are disappearing. The unwritten family recipes or a grandfather's stories vanish without a trace. There is a specific, slow grief that arrives when you realize you can no longer recall the exact sound of a deceased loved one's voice, because only the resume version of their life remains. Time itself is our own invading army. It quietly erases our vital, unwritten history, while we are distracted by cataloging our official milestones. The monk had no special commission or permission from a king to do what he did. He simply noticed a loss and chose to act. Look closely at your own life and identify one piece of unofficial memory slipping away right now. It might be a retiring coworker's accumulated lessons, or a parent's entirely untold childhood story. Ask the specific question that forces them to remember, and physically write the answer down on paper today. Perfection and publication are not the goal here. The only requirement is refusing to let one small, important story vanish on your watch. The question you must carry with you is this: whose story are you the exact last person able to write down?